You probably think the shape of a Chihuahua's head comes down to random breeding, that an Apple Head Chihuahua and a Deer Head Chihuahua are just luck of the litter. They're not. This is the world's smallest recognized dog breed, a toy breed whose skull is doing something almost no other dog's does. And there's a specific genetic instruction that decides whether this dog's skull fuses shut like almost every other dog's or stays open. Today we're going to follow it all the way down to the bone. Start with the thing you can actually see. On top of an Apple Head skull, in the exact spot a human baby has a soft spot, many Chihuahuas have a gap called a molera. A human's closes within 2 years. In a lot of these dogs, it never does. They live their whole lives with a small window in the top of the skull covered by nothing but skin. Breeders spent decades treating that as a defect, something to hide from a judge's hands at a show. But that soft spot isn't a flaw in the blueprint. It is the blueprint. It's the visible fingerprint of an instruction telling this skull to fuse on a completely different schedule than the rest of the dog world. Here's the part most videos get wrong. They'll tell you it's one magic gene, one tidy DNA sequence, and hand you a name. The truth is more interesting than that, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what science has pinned down about cranial suture genetics in microdogs, and what a dog DNA test can and can't actually tell you about the head on your own Chihuahua. To understand the Apple Head, you have to understand that a skull isn't a single bone. It's a set of separate plates, grown one at a time and pushed together like continents. The seams where they meet are called sutures, and the soft junctions where several plates almost touch are called fontanelles. In a newborn puppy or human, those seams are open on purpose, so the skull can flex through birth and then balloon outward fast enough to keep up with a growing brain. When the growing is done, the body sends a signal, and the seams turn to bone. They fuse. The whole apple versus deer question comes down to one thing: when that signal gets sent and how strong it is. That's the dial, and a handful of genes control it. The master switch is a gene called RUNX2. It tells the body when to stop building cartilage and start locking bone into place. Turn it up, and the face grows long and the seams close early. That's your Deer Head Chihuahua, with the sloped snout and the fully sealed skull. Ease it back, and the face stays short. The brain case pushes upward into a dome, and the closing signal comes late, or at the fontanelle on top of the head, never comes at all. That's the Apple Head. That's the molera. Doctors have a technical term for the extreme version of this short skull shape: brachycephaly. And the Chihuahua is one of the most striking examples of brachycephaly in the toy dog world. And here's the detail that makes this real, not marketing. In humans, when that exact same RUNX2 pathway misfires, doctors see delayed skull fusion and open fontanelles in adults, a condition called cleidocranial dysplasia. Same gene, same soft spot, different species. A second gene, BMP3, works alongside it, shrinking and rounding the brain case in small dogs, which is why the dome shows up in Chihuahuas and not in Labradors. And more recently, researchers identified a third player, SMOC2, a gene flagged in 2017 as another contributor to brachycephalic skull shape in dogs, another dial in the same control panel. So it was never one magic gene, it was a dial. And the Apple Head is simply what happens when that dial is turned all the way towards stay open. Before we flip that dial the other way, if this is the kind of thing you find yourself wanting to know, the real machinery under a dog you thought you understood, that's the entire reason this channel exists. Subscribe and stick around, because the Deer Head is where this story gets genuinely strange. And if you've got a Chihuahua at home, drop a comment. I want to know which head yours has. Now, back to the dial. Flip it the other way, and you get the dog half the internet quietly writes off, the Deer Head Chihuahua. Longer muzzle, flatter forehead, a face that really does look like a young fawn. And because it doesn't match the rounded show ring look, people assume the worst about it. They assume it's mixed, watered down, part something else, a not real Chihuahua. That's completely wrong, and this is where the genetics matter most. A deer head isn't a different breed, and it isn't a mutt. It's the same animal with its skull fusion dial turned toward close-on schedule. The snout runs longer because the face kept growing before RUNX2 called time. The top of the skull sealed the way most dogs do, so there's usually no molera. Genetically, a deer head and an apple head can come from the same litter, from the same two purebred parents, and both be 100% Chihuahua. Here's the part that trips everyone up. People run a dog DNA test, something like Embark or Wisdom Panel, expecting it to settle the apple versus deer argument, and it can't. A dog DNA test reads breed ancestry. It scans markers that say this is Chihuahua. It doesn't have an apple head result and a deer head result because head shape isn't a breed, it's a setting inside one. Your test can confirm the dog is pure Chihuahua while telling you absolutely nothing about why its skull came out domed or sloped. And that gap between what people think the DNA says and what it actually says is exactly where the trouble starts. Because for 100 years, one of those two heads was declared correct, the other declared a mistake, and breeders started chasing the dome on purpose. What they were really selecting for wasn't just a look. It was that open window in the skull and everything that can come through it. For most of a century, the apple head was the trophy. The American Kennel Club breed standard explicitly calls for a well-rounded apple dome skull, and that language mattered. Kennel clubs wrote the rounded skull into the standard, judges rewarded it, and buyers paid more for it, so breeders selected for it, generation after generation, pushing the dome higher and the dog smaller. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more extreme you make that dome, the more you're also selecting for the open skull underneath it. Let's be precise, because this is where the internet gets hysterical and wrong. A molera by itself isn't a disease. Plenty of Apple Head Chihuahuas live long, completely normal lives with one. The Chihuahua is actually the rare breed whose official standard historically accepted the soft spot as a normal trait. On its own, it's usually harmless. The problem is what it can sit next to. That same open fontanelle is also one of the warning signs veterinarians watch for with hydrocephalus, a buildup of fluid on the brain. A molera doesn't mean a dog has it, but the further you push toward an extreme, exaggerated dome on an extremely tiny skull, the more you stack the odds toward the version where that open window is a symptom and not just a quirk. When cuter means rounder and smaller, you're turning the dial toward the risky end on purpose. This is why canine genetic health testing and an honest breeder matter more than the shape of the head you were sold. A responsible breeder screens for the real conditions, is upfront about the molera, and doesn't market a dog as premium because its skull is more open than the next one's. The dome was never a mark of quality. It's a developmental setting. And when it's chased to extremes, the dog is the one who pays for it. So here's where we land. The apple head and the deer head were never two different dogs, and they were never decided by chance. They're two readings of the same instruction, a dial inside every Chihuahua that controls when the skull stops growing and locks itself shut. Turn it one way and the seams seal on schedule, and you get the long face of the deer head. Turn it the other way, and the brain case domes upward while the top of the skull stays open, the apple head and its molera, that small window that never closes. That's the real answer to a question most people never think to ask. Not one magic gene, not a marketing label, a developmental switch, the same family of switches, RUNX2, BMP3, and SMOC2, that shape skulls across the entire animal kingdom, dialed to an extreme in a dog that fits in your hand. A dog, by the way, whose ancestors go back to an ancient breed called the Tekichi, kept by the Toltecs long before any kennel club existed to write standards or pick winners. That dial was turning long before we started watching it. And a dog DNA test, your embark, your wisdom panel, will happily tell you that dog is a Chihuahua. What it will never tell you is the thing that actually shaped the head you fell in love with. That was decided long before the test, before the puppy was born, in the quiet moment its skull chose whether to close. Look at your Chihuahua's head a little differently now. And if you want the next one of these, another dog you thought you knew, taken apart by its own DNA, you already know where the subscribe button is.